United States shoots down high-altitude object over Alaska days after Chinese spy balloon. A United States fighter jet shot down a high-altitude object off the coast of Alaska. The Pentagon said it shot down an unidentified object over frozen waters around Alaska on Friday, at the order of President Biden, less than a week after a United States fighter jet brought down a Chinese spy balloon over the Atlantic in an episode that increased tensions between Washington and Beijing. The latest object was smaller than the spy balloon and flying at a lower altitude, which posed a threat to civilian aircraft, the White House said. Several officials said they believed the object shot down Friday was a balloon, but a Defense Department official said it broke into pieces when it hit the frozen sea, which added to the mystery of whether it was indeed a balloon, a drone or something else. In a statement on Twitter, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of Canada said he was briefed on the matter and supported the decision to take action. American radar picked up the object around 9 p.m. on Thursday Alaska time, and United States Northern Command sent an AWACS surveillance aircraft, accompanied by an aerial refueling plane, to track it. The object, officials said, had traversed over land in Alaska and was back over the sea heading toward the North Pole, traveling at 20 to 40 miles per hour, before it was struck down. The mission occurred less than a week after a high-altitude Chinese surveillance balloon was shot down off the coast of South Carolina. Michael P. Mulroy, a former Pentagon official, said that shooting the object down over Alaska was the right action. If it was another Chinese spy balloon, that indicates that China is either incompetent in operating these platforms or potentially deliberately provoking the US, Mr. Mulroy said. It is also important for the United States and China to maintain direct communications during times like this, especially between the militaries. United States officials said Friday evening that they had no evidence that the object over Alaska had come from China. General Ryder said it was traveling northeast when Northern Command began tracking it, but he would not speculate on its provenance. He said the Pentagon had made no effort to contact China since Beijing rebuffed a phone call from Defense Secretary Lloyd J. Austin III last week. The spy balloon episode last week has increased United States-China tensions at a time when the relationship between the two nations is at one of the lowest points in decades. Secretary of State Antony J. Blinken canceled a trip last weekend to Beijing, where he had been expected to meet with President Xi Jinping, after the Pentagon told reporters about the balloon. Pentagon officials said the spy balloon had posed no threat, and allowing it to stay in the air longer gave the United States military time to study it, including having U-2 spy planes take high-resolution images of its equipment. During internal deliberations, some United States officials pressed for options to shoot down the balloon earlier. Officials also reviewed whether the military could use a giant net or hook to bring down the balloon. The Friday shoot-down showed Mr. Biden taking direct and forceful action far more quickly than he did last week, when some Republican lawmakers criticized him for letting the spy balloon linger over the United States for several days before destroying it. But that period of observation last week allowed American officials to collect intelligence about the spy balloon, while in the episode on Friday, officials seemed unsure about what exactly they shot down. Pentagon officials said they were able to immediately bring down the object over water, so they could easily avoid the dilemma posed by the spy balloon drifting over populated areas, which had prompted commanders to recommend to Mr. Biden to wait to shoot down the machine in order to avoid any chance of debris hitting people on the ground. 3 United States officials said that, as of Friday evening, the government did not know who owned or sent the object seen above Alaska, which, like the Chinese balloon last week, was shot down by an F-22 fighter jet using a Sidewinder air-to-air missile. The object was destroyed by a missile from an F-22 fighter plane off the far northeastern coast of Alaska, Kirby said at a White House press briefing. The United States military first became aware of the object on Thursday night. President Joe Biden gave the order to shoot it down on Friday morning, which was carried out shortly after noon. The craft was flying at approximately 40,000 feet in altitude, which is lower than the balloon last week, and it was the size of a small car, he said. Unlike the balloon shot down on Saturday, the latest object did not appear to possess any maneuverability, Kirby said. Last week's spy balloon was the size of 3 school buses, according to Pentagon officials, a sophisticated surveillance craft with propellers that gave it maneuverability. The balloon carried a payload the size of a jetliner. The latest incident also differed significantly from the prior one, in that this floating object was shot down within hours of its detection. The larger, previous balloon was permitted to float across the United States for a week before Biden gave the order to shoot it down. The Pentagon defended that decision at a Senate hearing on Thursday, telling lawmakers that the spy balloon's primary value to the U.S. military lay in what could be learned from its flight course and its debris. A key part of the calculus for this operation was the ability to salvage, understand and exploit the capabilities of the high-altitude balloon, said Assistant Secretary of Defense Melissa Dalton. Another factor influencing the decision to let the previous balloon remain in the air was that it was floating at approximately 60,000 feet in altitude, where it did not pose an immediate threat to civilian aircraft. Commercial airliners typically cruise at an altitude of 35,000 feet. The object shot down on Friday was floating at just 40,000 feet, however, creating what the White House called a reasonable threat to air safety. The New York Times reported last Saturday that a classified intelligence report given to Congress last month highlighted at least 2 instances of a foreign power using advanced technology for aerial surveillance over American military bases, one in the continental United States and the other overseas. The research suggested China was the foreign power, United States officials said. The report gave details of a recent government review of unidentified aerial phenomena and, in that context, discussed earlier episodes of surveillance balloons as well as other flying objects. The Commerce Department announced on Friday that it was banning most trade between United States companies and several Chinese companies that it had identified as aerospace and technology enterprises that have ties to the People's Liberation Army of China, the Chinese military. Among other things, the companies help supply airships, balloons or related components to military intelligence gathering, surveillance and reconnaissance programs, the department said. The Chinese companies are mostly based in large cities and manufacturing hubs, including Beijing, Guangzhou and Dongguan. American companies will have to apply for a license to do business with those companies, which are being put on an entity list. But the licenses would most likely be denied, the department said. The announcement framed the move as a response to the spy balloon incursion last week, but it is unclear whether American officials had already been discussing possible sanctions against these companies earlier. The PRC's use of high-altitude balloons violates our sovereignty and threatens American national security. Alan Estevez, the Undersecretary of Commerce for Industry and Security, said in the announcement, referring to the People's Republic of China. Today's action makes clear that entities that seek to harm United States national security and sovereignty will be cut off from accessing United States technologies. China asserts that the 2 balloons spotted last week in the United States and Latin America were both civilian machines used for weather researcher test flights. They drifted off course and are Chinese property, officials in Beijing said. United States officials say there have been at least 3 intrusions into United States airspace by Chinese spy balloons during the Trump administration and 2 during the Biden administration, mainly in coastal areas. Before last week, officials said, they entered and left United States territory quickly.